Good morning, and welcome to this Arizona Capital Times morning scoop called Clean Energy Investments in Arizona, Fueling Environmental Sustainability and Economic Development. I'm your moderator, Steve Goldstein. Great panel today. Dan Steller, Arizona State Director for the Nature Conservancy, Maren Mahoney, Director of the Governor's Office of Resiliency, and Steve Zylstra, President and CEO of the Arizona Technology Council. First of all, thank all the three of you for joining us early on this Thursday morning. Thanks again. Dan, let's start off with a really big question, because I think when we have a great hour discussion like this, we might as well set the table as cleanly as we can. How have historic federal investments helped these economic and environmental interests to coalesce to make a positive difference in Arizona? And I'm going to ask you for even more background than this. Let's remind viewers of what these most important federal investments were.
Great. Well, thanks, Steve, for the question, and good morning to you. Good morning to everyone, and thanks to all who did join early on a Thursday morning. So, yeah, I think that really is the right question. And when we look at what we're talking about with the federal investments, really are, the two very large pieces of federal legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the IIJA. So, and these two together are really have the potential and really are the most transformative pieces of legislation from the perspective of a clean energy economy that we've ever seen. And I think it's fair to say there are probably differences of opinion about, some of aspects of these legislation, and probably even from the folks who are watching today. But what I really see from my position as Arizona State Director for the Nature Conservancy is exactly as you framed the question, that these two pieces of legislation really have benefited both our economy and the environment in Arizona at the same time. And I think we can really feel proud as a state of how well we've done at putting those funds to work in ways that do benefit both our economy and the environment. And then we kind of just very quickly address it from two ways that I think that that's happened. The first is if we look at the kind of macro level. So Arizona received about $2 billion in federal investment, and we've leveraged that with $12 billion of private investment. And that puts us in about the top 10 of state, about the 10th highest ranked state in how successfully we've brought private investment to play here. And it's also created about 18,000 clean energy jobs, which again is where I think that's in the top seventh state there. So we've done a great job at leveraging that money. So if you look at the macro level, we've really benefited our economy with this federal investment and really established ourselves as a clean energy hub. Of course, very much around around battery technology for electric vehicles, for example, and of course also around solar, grid transmission, hydrogen, all other types of clean energy as well. So tremendous investment on the industry business side of it at the macro level. But on the household level, these bills have also had significant impact. And, I'm sure Maren will speak more about this, but, the state was very successful in putting some of this money in a program called Solar for All, which helps lower income households use solar energy. So all kinds of energy efficiency aspects to this that help people reduce the cost that they're paying for energy. So it's really benefiting both the state at the macro level with these big investments that are really transforming us, frankly, into a powerhouse for a clean energy economy, and helping at the individual level, helping households both benefit with real economic benefits. And again, all of those have clean energy at their root.
And Maren, before you weigh in, I want to go to Steve Z on this one. As Dan said, Steve, there are some people who might be watching this morning who, are still a little hesitant. Maybe they're questioning these things. So as someone who's been involved in the business end of this for so long, what would you say to people who make the assumption that the environmental success and the economic success can't go together, or they're at loggerheads in some way?
Well, I think in every aspect of business, decisions are made where there are trade-offs, there are compromises that people have to make. Sometimes you have things that are sort of working at cross purposes. So, leaders have to make important decisions about these kinds of investments. And I think increasingly what we're seeing in the business sector, particularly in large companies, is that shareholders and employees especially. Large companies have a large cohort of younger employees who worry, are greatly concerned about climate change and the effect that it's having on our climate. And so I think those are forcing companies to make these hard decisions. And I think you probably have noticed that almost every large corporation now has someone dedicated to ESG. So, you know, there's someone often that reports up to the CEO that's making these trade-offs, helping the company make these trade-offs. And I'll just add to the economic impact that Dan indicated. So far, in terms of both federal and private investment, in the last 2 years, we've had $11.8 billion worth of investments in Arizona, creating over 18,000 jobs. And it's not just in the metropolitan areas, which is important. 3.56 billion of that investment is in low-income communities, 2,800 jobs in that case, and 2.16 billion of that is in rural communities, over 1,000 jobs. So it is being dispersed across Arizona's economy, and those are big numbers going into our economy and creating very important, high-paying, high-quality jobs.
I'll ask all of you about job situation going forward, because I think that's a real fascinating part of this workforce development, et cetera. But Marion, let me start off with big picture for you. Obviously, Governor Hobbs has had a priority related to this, related to the environment, clean energy. How has state government worked to roll out projects related to some of this big funding that we asked Dan about?
Yeah, Steve. So as you said, from the first day of the Hobbs administration, we have been working very hard to bring all of these federal funding opportunities to Arizona, and also to forge greater relationships with those communities who are going to benefit from them. We're listening to the community's needs and developing programs right now so that we can grant the funds when we can get them those benefits directly that are really responsive to those community needs. And it's important to recognize here that the grants, the tax incentives, the low interest loans, all made possible through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the CHIPS Act, which we haven't mentioned. These are made possible through the federal government, but they're not just kind of handed out to the state government. They're not handed out to nonprofits or the private sector. You really have to work hard to get those, to bring them. And so that's really something that Governor Hobbs has really directed everyone across state government to do so, and to also help communities, to help tribes who might not have the capacity, because there is a lot of work that goes into getting those dollars, to get them to provide support where possible. So to sort of Dan's point, you know, the investments in this new energy generation and in technologies that are helping Arizonans bring down their monthly electric bills, it's really, really critical right now for our future. So when we make investments, you don't usually see that ROI for years, right? Especially at the policy and the state and federal government levels. So we're really the beneficiaries right now. For instance, I know that the commission highlighted the other day our reliable grid. And that's because of the investments and the decisions that were made in years past, right? And so right now we're investing in Arizona's future so that the future Arizonans can be beneficiaries. But also more immediately, we're working to develop programs where we can bring down Arizonans' electric bills right now, because as we know, our hot summers are getting hotter and longer. It's where I am, I think I'm in Phoenix, so it's gonna be another over 100-degree day. This is life or death for people. If they can't afford their electric bills, that could be life or death. So my office is really focused on bringing down those electric bills through things like the Solar for All program and also our home energy rebate programs.
I think this is interesting. Yeah, sorry. Okay, can I jump in with one more thing? I think it's so interesting what you said about short-term versus long-term investments. I didn't want to cut off your previous answer, so keep going on that. But I'd love to have you weigh in on that too, in terms of, when you're doing these things, you have to have some sort of vision, because as you're saying, two of the hottest summers, maybe the two hottest summers we've ever had in the Phoenix area. And so people are thinking short term, but you also want to make it so decades from now, this is still a place with great quality of life where people can afford to live without, frankly, burning up in their homes. To be too dramatic, sorry. But anyways, keep going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you've got to, like you said, you've got to balance that. So we're developing plans in my office, and also in other areas of the government to create that vision and that roadmap to how do we spend these dollars down, that really benefit in the long term. But we're also developing the programs to help Arizonans right now. We mentioned 18,000 jobs created. That's just in the first year, 2 years. What happens in the next 5 years? How do we keep that going? How do we make sure that new graduates, for high school graduates, are choosing the pathways that we really need, to make sure that we have thriving industries here in Arizona? So all of these investments are going to need people to work in them, right? We've got investments in water conservation, improving and maintaining roads and bridges. We have $1 billion for broadband so that Arizonans, especially in rural and tribal areas, have access to broadband, and access to the internet. We need people to build that stuff. And so that's part of the planning, is not only planning out for the investments, but how do we get the people, how do we have the right workforce, the right certificates and apprenticeships and degree programs to help people get to those high wage stable jobs that also help Arizona as a whole. So I just, that kind of, I wanted to bring that up as part, because I know you had mentioned jobs. And so, I mean, jobs is really such a high priority here, because we don't realize the full benefits of these investments without jobs being created here.
Well, Dan, that comes back to this idea of the coalescing of the economic and environmental interests. The fact that when you can show numbers like more than $1 billion with 18,000 jobs in just a short term, that might even be a way to turn heads a little bit and say, oh, all right, this isn't something we necessarily have to wait 20 years for or completely change our whole lifestyle. We can do these things gradually and make huge impacts in the short and long term.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. I think, what we've seen with the IRA and the IIJA has been kind of that once in generation investment shot in the arm that allows for this type of investment. But it is exactly as Marion said, that it's how you put those funds to work and what are the long-term investments that allows, that really do allow us to transform our economy at the state level and to have these investments that will pay off for a long time. So yeah, that's absolutely right.
Steve, let me come to you about with some of these jobs that are created. As Marion said, there more and more being created, more and more are needed, though, and you have to have highly skilled workers for a lot of these. What are some of the challenges to that, and what are some of the ways of making that happen sooner rather than later?
Well, first of all, as we've indicated, some of these investments are being made in rural communities, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. So Casa Grande, we have Lucid Motors, and Coolidge, we have Nikola, electric vehicles, electric and hydrogen Class 8 trucks. These investments are transformative in those communities. You can't even begin to understand how these investments have changed those communities in a positive way. I was just at a Lucid Motors event, and the mayor of Casa Grande was there, and she was sharing with us that one of the employees of Lucid had talked to her about how the fact that she now has this job at Lucid has allowed her for the first time ever to buy a home. So these are high-paying, high-quality jobs that are being created in these communities, and the benefit to the communities is just unbelievable. And part of that is in, as I said, creating these high-paying, high-quality jobs, and people are able to enhance their quality of life and standard of living as a consequence of it.
Aaron, that makes me come back to what you said about whether it's working with tribal entities or communities around the state. Obviously, that's a priority of the administration, but what are the challenges built into that to make sure that there is buy-in, that there is trust, that there's a feeling that everyone's as much on the same page as you can be.
And I think whenever you have multiple entities, you've got a large coalition building, that's going to be a challenge, right? People are challenging. I think we need to all listen. And I think that's really one of the key, I think, elements that Governor Hobbs brings as a leader, and that she brings to the administration, as has really directed us to make sure that when we're developing these programs and rolling them out, we're making sure that we're talking to the communities and trying to find ways forward as that in ways that benefit the community and as Arizona as a whole, right? Steve kind of mentioned that we need to, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, but I'm sure I'll come back to it. But it's really all about listening and making sure that we are building long-term relationships. He mentioned trade-offs. There's going to be trade-offs regardless of whenever decisions come up, there's trade-offs. And so when it comes to deciding the trade-offs, that's really where some of the challenges come up. And I think we're forging a path forward so that with an eye towards the vision of what we want Arizona to be in the next 5 and 10 and 20, 30 years.
Dan, would you weigh in on that? The the excitement, but also the challenges of working with so many different communities in such a growing state.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so folks may know Nature Conservancy is a collaborative, pragmatic organization. So everything we do really does come down to partnerships, and whether that's with tribes, with ranchers, with farmers, with technology. Of course, we're happy to be here today with both public and private sector. So yeah, I mean, certainly for us, that's core to the DNA that we have as an organization. But I think more to the point here, it is really critical to making progress on these. When we're talking about something really that really is no less than transforming our economy and moving to a real clean energy economy, that's only going to happen with partnerships and with collaboration. So at some point, Stephen, either now or later, maybe we can say a few things just about what the scope of that transition really is and what that looks like.
I would love to do that right now, actually.
Sure,
Before we do that, we had a viewer that wants me to reintroduce all of you to make sure that we know what people's titles are. So Dan Steller is Arizona State Director for the Nature Conservancy. Marion Mahoney is Director of the Governor's Office of Resiliency. And Steve Zylstra is President and CEO of the Arizona Technology Council. So yeah, Dan, let's get into this. I didn't really know how or when to ask it, but how massive is the scope of this and what sort of impact can it have?
Yeah, so again, this really, I mean, we keep kind of using these words like, transformative, but I mean, that is really what we're talking about here. And the amount of clean energy that is going to need to come online to power us as a clean energy economy, just to kind of talk about from that side for a minute, what's it going to take to really power the state, and not just the state, but the West as with clean energy is transformative. It's going to change the landscape of the West. And you can kind of think of it a little bit like the scope and scale of the interstate highway system. For example, just these landscape level changes. Nature Conservancy is a science-based organization. So we've done a lot of science to look at this. And in our last analysis from a few years ago, said that we're going to need at least about 20 million acres of renewable energy siting. And, that sounds like a big number. So I looked it up. I'm not from Arizona. I'm from Massachusetts, so a small state. Massachusetts is 7 million acres, right? So we're talking 3 times the size of Massachusetts. So, just a massive amount of clean energy that will get sited to power us in the way that we need to and want to be powered to meet our clean energy goals. And we really believe that while that is a massive amount, that can be done sustainably, and it can be done in a way that protects lands and waters, protects working lands and waters as well. But like so much else that we've been talking about here today, that is long-term, that requires planning, it requires thoughtfulness in how we approach it, and really using smart siting tools and making those decisions at the beginning, so we are really directly addressing some of those trade-offs that Marion was just talking about and minimizing them where possible. But it is a tremendous transition that we're looking at.
Well, Dan, with the Nature Conservancy being so committed to making sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed when it comes to protecting the environment while moving the economy forward, I want to talk about the conscientiousness that goes into that, if I may, like the idea of just how much time and energy is put into that to make sure that what people love about the West and Arizona specifically is preserved, while also knowing that this has to be a very competitive economic state to keep things protected and keep things going.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And again, I think what we really do see here is a kind of a coalescing of energy, of environmental, if you will, or environmental clean energy related interest and economic interest. And one way to think of it is, and I imagine Steve may and Mary can also really speak to this, but what we hear from our utility partners is that so much of the industry that's coming to Arizona, of course, a lot of it is inherently clean energy related work. We talked about, electric vehicle batteries or solar or what have you. But even if you look more broadly, the industry that's coming in is requiring clean energy, right? For there to be the kind of corporations industry they want to power themselves with clean energy. So for us to maintain our economic competitiveness as a state, it's really essential that we have those clean, reliable supplies of clean energy. And again, it almost kind of short circuits some of the political arguments there, because it really is, I think, about, that is what's going to increase our economic competitiveness the most.
Yeah, Steve, can I have you weigh in on that one first?
Yeah, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm curious just about the whole, when we talk about the scope of these things and making sure, and coming sort of back to the same idea of the economic benefits fitting with the environmental benefits. But let me have you specifically talk about what Dan had said about companies that are coming here. They want to have this clean energy factor to them. And you work so specifically with tech companies. How are tech companies viewing this?
So, as I indicated earlier, a lot of tech companies, are making these trade-offs. But I would say the tech industry, in many ways, is leading the way when it comes. First of all, they're working at the leading edge of all sorts of technology. So, we're bringing a lot of advanced manufacturing companies here, including 4 gigafactories being built here simultaneously. All of them have considerable strategic plans to both save water and energy. They're using the latest technologies. I think, Intel, for instance, in the semiconductor world is not only focused on having net zero water impact, but actually producing more water than it consumes. So I think you'll find that technology companies, advanced manufacturers are, this is a part of their strategic plan to be as clean as possible. My members like Google, Meta, Apple, Microsoft are all insisting that 100% of their power come from clean sources. So it's really changing the dynamic in Arizona and across the country because of it's a demand side issue, right? Rather than something the government is forcing on the market. Again, using that word transformative, I think what's going on with these companies is transforming the way that we produce and consume energy.
Big picture, can you end? Yes, please go ahead.
So just before we started this webinar, we were discussing how Arizona is now re-engaging regionally outside of our state. And I have to say, every other state and every other region that I interact with is facing the challenge of a need for more electricity generation, period, regardless of resource. So I think really when it comes down to is, where are we going to get our more electricity from? I think sometimes we have this dynamic or this binary of either clean energy or fossil fuel energy, and that there's sort of a demonization of the transition to clean energy, and when in fact it's really just an issue of innovation when it comes to technologies. It's a better use of resources, frankly, because as Steve alluded to, it's more water friendly. There's no water usage that comes from the generation of electricity from renewable energy. And then we don't really have much Other than coal, we don't have many resources. We have no oil and gas industry to speak of here in Arizona. There are a couple of things up in northern Arizona, but truly not really an industry because we don't have the resources here. And so we have solar. We all know we have solar. We also have some wind. Why not use the resources that Arizona has to generate more electricity, and then to develop, that's an economic generator as well. Communities can get great, it's a tax base for communities that site the solar there. And there's some construction and maintenance jobs that come from those facilities as well. Now, I think, so we need more electricity, but so we need to decide, what do we want? I know that there's opposition to siting new generation in parts of Arizona, and that is regardless of technology. I know there are natural gas plants that are also being opposed. And so I think we're kind of at a point where we need to have a better, more strategic plan as to how we're going to get our new electric generation. And there are other ways, not just building out. That is a large a number of acreage, although when you that Dan mentioned, but when you really put it in the context of Arizona's acreage, it's actually a very small percentage. But there's ways of doing that smartly, and also there's ways of getting electricity and participating in regional markets, which is something that my office is working on as well. We can decrease demand through energy efficiency. We can site through distributed generation, and that not only helps with that also brings private investment, and also, but it alleviates some of the need for that land use. And then there's smart siting opportunities too. There's all of these other ways. It's not like a binary where we're going to build out utility scale. There are a lot. The energy system, and this is why I love it so much. It's so rich with possibility, and it's so exciting. So I think if we do ourselves a disservice in Arizona if we don't look at all of the exciting opportunities that we have and the many resources that we have at our disposal here, and then to build out a policy and regulatory framework that really supports that innovation and opportunity.
Yeah, Dan, it's exciting to hear how ambitious even Marion is from that perch. I presume with Nature Conservancy, you're hearing that and even more excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I really agree with Marin's framing there. And, a lot of times we say it's kind of an all of the above approach, right? I mean, the demand for energy is tremendous. It's growing at rates that we didn't even anticipate a few years ago necessarily. And so absolutely, it is an all of the above approach. And it really is a rich topic. And I mean, the one other thing I would just add to that too is it's an incredible, and I'm not the expert in this by any stretch, but it's an incredibly dynamic field where, things that are possible even now just weren't part of the discussion even 3-5 years ago. I mean, battery technology, large scale battery technology. Even when I started working for the Nature Conservancy 9 years ago, and even when I got this job 5 years ago, the things that we can do now were off the table then from a technological, not that we can do, but that society can do, that can be done. So the energy field is incredibly rich. It's incredibly dynamic, and we need to be really realistic about the scope and scale of the challenges. And we also, I think, do have to lean into how quickly it's changing and what innovation really is possible there. And again, Arizona is doing a great job of demonstrating a lot of that.
Could I just add that?
Yeah, please come in. Yeah.
Both Marin and Dan mentioned the increase in demand. It's so significant. People really don't realize what's going on. So first of all, we've had massive investments over the last 4 years in essentially advanced manufacturing. A lot of it's in the semiconductor industry. The state has gotten $105 billion worth of investments just in the semiconductor industry. They use a lot of water and power. All of these advanced manufacturers require a lot of power. And then we're number 2 in data centers in the nation. And we're number 1 in data center growth in the nation. And data centers also use a lot of power and water. And, you know, society, technology is being transformed by artificial intelligence, and that's going to be true in the tech industry as well. So data centers, the servers that they use are moving toward AI chips. AI chips consume between 3 to 10 times more power than a traditional chip. So that's going to significantly add to the demand. So, you know, developing more resources, like was said, you know, all the above is going to be absolutely critical. And I think one of the audience members asked about nuclear. Of course, we have the largest nuclear power plant in the United States here in Arizona with Palo Verde. As I recall, it's due to be decommissioned in 2050 or something like that. I suspect that's going to be lengthened. But as you know, there's a whole new generation of nuclear power. A lot of people have read about what Bill Gates is doing in places like Wyoming. But frankly, at least in any public comments, I have not seen any of our utilities in their plans talk about, you know, adding new nuclear to the Arizona landscape. So, you know, that's going to be investments that they're going to have to make. And I've seen no indication that there's anything in their planning that suggests nuclear in the short or long term.
Dan, I wonder, because of that was from an audience question, can nuclear be part of all of the above going forward beyond Palo Verde?
Yeah, it's a somewhat, you know, controversial question, and probably not sure I can make everyone happy with, at least with my answer to that. But yeah, I mean, I think, right, it is important to differentiate between existing and new nuclear to start with, for sure. And you know, certainly Nature Conservancy's position is that absolutely, as part of, at a minimum, as part of a bridge source of energy to get us, as we're really transforming our energy system, nuclear does have a role to play as a clean, non-emission generating base load source of power. And, you know, of course, in Arizona, Palo Verde is a really important part of the mix. And we have done different modeling, both with and without nuclear, as part of a mix going forward, and with nuclear, new nuclear potentially as part of it. And, you know, I guess what I would say maybe a little more generally is the field is changing so much, and the more you constrain your options, then the bigger your trade-offs are on other side. So for example, if you want to look at a mix that only is renewable, say, is only solar and wind, that is inherently going to have a much larger footprint than options, for example, that include existing and maybe that include new nuclear. So I think it's really a question of, you know, really looking at trade-offs there and seeing what's possible. But, you know, we can't dismiss nuclear out of, certainly it's a challenge, there are challenges associated with it, and we can't minimize those. But as a clean and baseload source, we also can't dismiss it as part of the energy mix. So it's something I think we need to look at, and we do need to differentiate, you know, the importance of keeping existing online and or, you know, what we do with new nuclear. And also, the very last thing I'll say about this is, in some of our initial analysis from a few years ago, and this may well have changed with what Steve is talking about there, new nuclear was coming in at a lot more expensive than other options for energy. So, you know, that has to be factored in as well. And again, some of that may change over time, but just from a straight economic competitiveness, when we did a lot of modeling that allowed for, well, could we have new nuclear, it actually just kind of got ruled out in a lot of cases from an economic standpoint.
Aaron, did you want to weigh in on that?
Oh, you know, I think my comments are really echoing Dan's. We don't necessarily have a stance when it comes to nuclear. Palo Verde is an excellent resource that provides carbon-free electricity for not only Arizona, but for California. And that's a really important part of our portfolio. But as Dan mentioned, there are major challenges with nuclear and building new nuclear. We haven't, I mean, where are you getting the uranium from? We're seeing that as a massive challenge. And so I won't really go into that here, but that's a challenge. Waste disposal. that is something that kind of bedeviled the federal government for decades and continues to. I don't think Arizona is going to, figure that out either on our own. Water usage, nuclear is a large user of water. Palo Verde is an exemplary resource because they use recycled water 100%. As far as I know, the only nuclear plant that does that. But with water resources becoming more and more valuable in the state, including recycled water, that could challenge new nuclear power plants. Then citing it, and then as Dan mentioned, the cost. I think in Georgia, it came into like the new one that they had built there was like, I don't know, I want to say like $9 billion over the original estimates, and years beyond what they had originally planned for. That said, there's a lot of innovation happening and a lot of research and development happening with the small nuclear reactors. Those are not yet commercially available anywhere, and utilities are generally very risk averse when it comes to actually deploying new technologies like that. And so I think there's a little bit of a waiting game across the country. Who's going to go first and see how that goes? And so we're at the cusp of potentially some new nuclear, but there are also major challenges that I think we would really need to have an honest conversation about. When that evolves.
Steve, can I just mention one more thing?
Yes, of course. Yes.
So you've probably read about other strategies with nuclear, modular nuclear, right? These are small systems. It would require massive statutory and regulatory change to allow for this, but you could have a nuclear modular nuclear system that powered a community, that say powered a tech park that had a lot of industry in it. And I don't know if any of you saw the 60 Minutes piece on essentially nuclear on a Class 8 truck, right? It's a mobile nuclear power facility. So those are other options that are being considered, looked at, explored. Research is being done in that area. So who knows what might come from that.
All right, now we have a lot of viewer questions. I want to get to a few of them, hopefully not in a super clunky way. So this is one that a lot of people have talked about, and any of you can take this. Maybe Dan, I'll start with you on this. I'm always perplexed that solar hasn't taken off in Arizona. What specifically is being done to build the use of solar? We've sort of touched on what the next projects could be, but can you address that? I'd love to have you start, just talk about what specifically, and you can talk about other renewables if you want to, but specifically what's actually being done or has been done recently.
Yeah, I think I actually may punt that one to Maren or Steve in terms of the specific projects that are in place right now. I mean, certainly we do see, there have been specific investments related to growing our solar, related to the IRA and IIJA, and those are coming online for sure. But others may be able to speak to some of the specific projects.
Well, Steve, let me go to you, because I remember 20 years ago, to age myself, when I interviewed then Governor Napolitano, and she said, and I don't know that she said this to everyone, but there's a quote I remember very specifically: we should make Arizona the Saudi Arabia of solar. And that was 20 years ago. So how much progress have we made in those 20 years?
Well, we've made progress. There's no doubt about that. But there are a lot of barriers in this state for solar. And, I'm not going to get into the details, but a lot of it's political. And I have a member company that is the second largest solar developer in the United States. And very close to the chief financial officer there. And he has told me that they don't do anything in solar in Arizona because it's too hard. So there's a lot of political resistance to solar, to clean in general. And as a consequence, it makes it much more difficult. I agree with Janet. We should be the #1 solar state in the United States. There's no reason we shouldn't be. The technology exists. We have more photons hitting Arizona than any other state in the United States. So the stage is set, but it's there's headwinds in our sort of regulatory environment here that's preventing solar from becoming more prevalent here in Arizona.
Aaron, how much of those recent federal investments helped to progress that in any way without, jumping into the political realm there?
They helped enormously. And they will continue to see that impact. So Secretary Vilsack was just here maybe a month ago, and in part to champion the investment of over $400 million for APCO, for one of our rural co-ops, and that is going to allow them to build out renewable energy plus solar plus batteries and retire one of their natural gas plants, which is going to bring down their pollution by 70%. And that investment was not possible that development was not made possible without that package of loans and grants from the federal government. So from a large utility scale, we're seeing so much change really driven by this once in a lifetime opportunity. We're also seeing at the household scale, the smaller business, we're having solar for all. So my office is going to administer $156 million in solar for all dollars. We are just now standing up. We have a year of planning. We want to be incredibly thoughtful and intentional and very responsible with these dollars. And we're also trying to figure out how can we use this money to attract further private investment so that low and moderate income Arizonans can get solar, can have access to the smaller scale solar, and then all of the benefits that entail. I will briefly touch regulatory policy really impacts the benefits, and the way that they quantify those benefits really impacts the Arizonans who will participate in rooftop solar programs.
Yeah. Can we go big picture again on the leveraging the dollars and whether that is something that needs to be done really short term, and what are the most effective ways you think of doing that? Yeah,
well, as we've, I think, all said kind of repeatedly, I mean, certainly the recent federal dollars that are in play with the various bills, are probably for all of us once in a career kinds of things that we'll see. And, from a state perspective, it is absolutely, the opportunity is now to put those money to work, to leverage it. And again, Arizona has just done a really great job that I think we can all be proud of with that. But yes, if we take so there's kind of that answer to the question, but if we also take it from more of the environmental or ecological perspective, at the Nature Conservancy, we talk a lot about this being the decade to take action, right? Our science really clearly shows us that if we don't take action on the conservation issues we care about now related to climate change, related to protecting our lands and waters, protecting the people and animals that depend on those lands and waters, and ensuring they have the resources they need. If we don't do that right now, with the pace of change, the chance to do that could be gone forever by the next decade, or at a minimum, it'll be much more difficult. So, we at the Conservancy, and I think generally across the conservation field, and even more broadly, do see tremendous urgency to take action right now, to make these things happen right now. And something that's been really gratifying for me as state director, and as I talk to people, because these issues are so present in our lives right now, because of the heat that we're seeing, because of flooding issues, because of drought, because of forest fires, people understand that, the will, I think that the social will, if you could say it that way, really is there to take big action right now and to do things that will benefit both our economy and our environment in the long term. And I think the way we do that really is through partnerships. It's what has worked so well in a place like Arizona. It allows us to be here today talking with, again, a conservation group, the governor's office, and the Tech Council, right? It allows us to see that as Steve has discussed, a lot of this money has benefited communities across the state who have different political orientations and different economic orientations. So yeah, I think our continued success, it is very urgent, and the only answer that we really see is that that has to be through partnerships.
Steve, I want to ask you about the urgency of it from the business side of things, because as Dan said, I think the average person sees how hot the summers are. They've gotten hotter, the fact we're still in this decades-long drought, and there are more wildfires and that sort of thing. But does the business community generally, or the tech business community, see that in any different way? Or are they on board with the direction saying, okay, maybe it's not this decade, but it's certainly pretty soon we need to make some big changes?
Well, I can tell you, for instance, a lot of companies have set goals because of the accords, that we're going to be at zero carbon in 2050, and then there are shorter term goals in 2030. I have member companies that run data centers who have stakes in the ground to be at zero carbon in 2026 and 2027. So, particularly these large technology companies are making significant commitments to get to zero carbon. And they have people that have been hired to work on these kinds of things every day. And so I see that's where the momentum is. As I said, some of these large companies, particularly those that run data centers here, are insisting that 100% of their power come from clean sources. They make the decision to move here based on the ability to be able to get the clean energy. A lot of the big, I won't mention all the names, but a lot of the big attraction, the business attraction successes are a result of the ability to provide clean energy to the tech industry. And then, companies like TSMC put a massive amount of solar in. I think they have canopies on every parking spot, and on every one of those, there's solar power, offsetting some of their load. So you see that going on in the tech industry as well. So I think the momentum, at least in the tech industry, is definitely moving in that direction. One of the things we haven't talked about that I want to bring up is, we've talked about the massive number of jobs. We've talked about the massive investments that are being made. A lot of people may have the question, well, where's the workforce coming from, right? So I'll give a lot of kudos to the governor, both through Marin's office, through the Office of Economic Opportunity, through the Arizona Commerce Authority. There are a significant amount of workforce development initiatives going on. I don't know if you've heard about Drive 48, but that's one of those initiatives. And I'll just use another anecdote. In Casa Grande, we talked about Lucid, building an automotive facility in Arizona. There's never been an automotive facility in Arizona before. That entire workforce had to be produced. And through the Drive 48 initiative with the Central Arizona College, the college actually set up a simulated assembly line in the college, and 1,000 of the workers at Lucid have been trained through that program. 1,000. They're producing cars there, or they're about to launch another platform, an SUV. And that's where the workers are coming from. And again, we talked about the transformative nature in a rural community like that. Those are high-paying jobs. It elevates the standard of living for that entire community. In addition to that, I remember when I came back to Arizona in 2008, there were about 6,000 students in the engineering program at ASU. Today, there are 32,000. It's the largest engineering program in the United States by far. And both ASU and I think Pima Community College, those are the two I know about, have created, we have 4 gigafactories being built here in Arizona simultaneously. We got Core Power in Buckeye, LG in Queen Creek, and then we have 2 in Tucson, Scion and American Battery Factory. They're going to need talent, right? So ASU now has a program, focused on battery technology. Pima Community College, sort of at the, the skilled worker level, has programs focused on battery technology. So I think we have one of the best community college systems in the United States. There's no doubt about it. And that's going to produce a lot of these high-paying factory jobs for sure. And then our post-secondary institutions like ASU and NAU and U of A and GCU and so on are going to produce, the engineers and the higher skilled talent that's necessary. The system has responded remarkably. That's true in the semiconductor area as well, right? We get this massive growth in semiconductor demand for employees. So I think, again, with huge support from the governor's office and some from the legislature, Arizona is responding to the workforce needs. And I'm sure Maren has more to add to that.
Well, and Maren, before you jump in, I want to sort of do a follow-up question, which I didn't ask earlier, and I meant to. Everything that Steve's saying, I mean, obviously, great reason for optimism, but there are other states that Arizona has to compete with. So obviously, some of the things Steve mentioned make Arizona more competitive. But when you look at that scope from your perch in the governor's office, how competitive is Arizona with some of these other states?
Yes, so we are absolutely competing with other states for the federal investments, for workers, for company investments, and for companies coming to locate here. So I think, we are creating an atmosphere where Arizona is becoming more and more competitive. Governor Hobbs issued an executive order very recently that requires the state government to invest at least 1% of federal funds into workforce efforts. And she also established in that EO a workforce development cabinet. So I think that we were all really already doing it on our own, but now we have an increased level of collaboration across the state government to really focus that workforce development. And in my office, in the Office of Resiliency, we've created already, or we're already working towards a number of resiliency specific workforce initiatives. So one example is we are about to administer a grant to develop our energy contractor workforce. Another example is that we're developing a catalog. Actually, Steve basically just ran through a bunch of, basically did the verbal catalog for us. But we're developing a catalog essentially of all the existing courses and certificates and degree programs to really help us understand better where the gaps in terms of programs and locations and what we need for the, to actually get these investments done. And so once we get that out, I'm really excited to share that with people. I think, again, competitiveness with other states is, I think we've laid the groundwork when it comes to, or we are laying the groundwork when it comes to things like workforce development, and we are very visibly bringing in major manufacturers and in much needed sectors of the economy. That said, other states do have things like state funding, and they have very stable and ambitious policy initiatives that really build out that vision for clean energy. There are many states that have 100% carbon-free requirements by 2050. And there are states, a lot of funding that goes towards, that will match, private investments. And I think the private sector wants to see that. And also, I think there are some other states that, just have maybe a little bit of an advance when it comes to really assessing and understanding things like climate risk to various communities. So we are going to get there, and I think we are already quite competitive, and I think we can improve our competitiveness through a few other ways. But some of that is a little bit outside of my authority. And I think those will be challenging. But we are absolutely in competition with other states. Yes.
And Steve, the other benefit that Arizona has on the workforce side over a lot of other states is, as you know, Maricopa County is the fastest growing county in the United States year after year after year. Arizona, I think on average, adds about 100,000 net new people on an annual basis. So besides training our own through all this myriad of workforce development initiatives, you know, we bring in highly skilled talent from other places as a result of, you know, low cost of living, high standard of living, good business climate, all these other aspects that make Arizona so attractive.
Dan, you want to jump in?
No, I agreed with that completely. And maybe just to add, it's really gratifying, again, you know, to get back to kind of thing we started with, to see that, you know, I do think sometimes it exists a narrative of, well, it's either got to be good for the economy or good for the environment. And so much of the economic growth that we're seeing in Arizona is really in things that are great for our clean energy economy as well. So we really are kind of showing that it is possible to do both at the same time at a really impactful scale.
Dan, as we come to a close, and I've avoided the political question for the most part because I want to continue to do that. But just from a standpoint of when we think about, I'm going to sound like a Pollyanna here, but we think about clean water, we think about making sure that we can all live here and make sure that we can coexist with wildlife or saguaros that have been here for centuries and all these other things. Yeah. When you think about this, a call like this has made me more optimistic going forward. But what are your thoughts as far as getting this done in a way that not necessarily takes politics out of it, but takes the politicians out of it, so that people who are moving in this direction, there can be more assistance. We're talking about like the impact of Governor Hobbs' administration going forward, but in a way that is a nonpartisan way to recognize that, you know, people came to Arizona for a reason, and we don't want to lose the reasons that people came here because we're not prepared for the challenges of heat, et cetera.
Yeah, wow, there's so many things to say about that, and I know we're almost at time, and I want to give others a chance to weigh in on it. But yeah, I do think there is reason for optimism, as we've been discussing, and that is not in any way to be Pollyannish about it, to short sell the extent and scale of challenges that we face in Arizona and that we face across the West and across the nation. I mean, those are real, but there really is tremendous reason for optimism. And one way I think we get there, and you know, you can maybe get a little of the politics out of it, is the focus on outcomes. And you know, that's so much that we've talked about today. It's been about how, you know, all the jobs created, all the billions in private investment, all the clean energy benefits, all the air quality benefits of those things. And those are things that everybody wants, right? And so if we can really focus on those, then I think we can get, you know, that's the way to bring people together around it. And, you know, one kind of statistic we didn't give, but so much of that $12 billion of investment in the clean energy economy, you know, so it comes from the genesis of it is the pieces of legislation that were enacted by a Democratic White House, but much of it is touching down in traditionally Republican-held districts, in Republican-held parts of the state. And so I think it just really shows that, again, you know, if we focus on the outcomes, that's something that everybody wants, Democrats and Republicans, and really nonpartisan. You know, who doesn't want to benefit our economy and our environment together?
And I would just
go ahead, Steve.
Say, you know, in the business sector, businesses have their own values, their own culture, their own focus, their own strategy, and oftentimes government, you know, gets in the way of their success in their views. So they plot their own course, regardless of what the government is doing. They, you know, they have to work within the laws and the regulations and so on. But you know, and I see more and more companies have this culture that's focused on, you know, getting to zero carbon by 2050, and they're making the decisions and the moves that are necessary to move their organization in that direction, regardless of what's happening at the government level or, you know, in the political realm. So that's the one thing that encourages me more than anything else.
Erin, we've got about 30 seconds if you want a final thought.
Sure. I have two reasons for optimism here. First, these investments are desperately needed as our state's population grows and as our infrastructure in our communities, especially rural and tribal communities, are either non-existent or are aging. So anyone really who is pragmatic and who is there to serve their community and can see those needs for the investments today and for tomorrow, then yes, I think we're seeing a lot of nonpartisan, bipartisan effort there. And secondly, these investments are enormously popular. As Dan mentioned, the outcomes are enormously popular, and the amount of both Republican and Democratic politicians at these ribbon cuttings are a very good indication of that. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Mara. This has been the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop, clean energy investments in Arizona fueling environmental sustainability and economic development. Our great panelists were Dan Steller, Arizona State Director for the Nature Conservancy, Maren Mahoney, Director of the Governor's Office of Resiliency, and Steve Zeilstra, President and CEO of the Arizona Technology Council. Thank all of you for joining us this morning, and viewers, thank you as well. I'm Steve Goldstein.